Hey everyone, it's me, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm shaking writing this. I just drove back from that abandoned refinery outside Victoria, and what I heard on my scanner still echoes in my head. Tonight, I'm sharing 20 bone-chilling true stories from real night shift workers across Texas. Folks who clocked in expecting another slow, quiet shift, only to discover something watching them in the dark. I promise you, after hearing just one of these tales, you'll never feel safe on that midnight run again. If you're already feeling that knot in your stomach, do yourself a favor. Hit subscribe now. Because once you join Creepy Vibes, you won't want to miss a single whisper or shadow that crosses your screen. Before we get started, tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it on your clock right now? Drop it in the comments and brace yourself. Because we're about to plunge into 20 true encounters that will make you question every sound you hear after midnight. Let's go. At the edge of Pecos, where the desert lay flat and dead beneath a pale sky that never seemed to brighten, Roger worked the night shift at the old Sinclair station, the one with the cracked green dinosaur sign out front and the pumps that rattled and hissed when they kicked on, even though they were older than most of the rigs that stopped by. He'd taken the job because there wasn't much else to do in Pecos except waste away in trailer parks or drink until your liver gave out, and at least here, the nights passed in steady routine. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the faint tang of gasoline, the metallic click of the register drawer. For the first few weeks, nothing strange happened. A drifter here and there, sometimes a convoy of cattle haulers rumbling through at dawn, the drivers red-eyed and silent, and the occasional teenager rolling in for smokes or beer with fake IDs that fooled nobody. But then, just as the air started to cool in late September, Roger noticed the truck. He almost didn't catch it the first night. Just a shape on the edge of the station's pool of light. Headlights off. The engine growling low like some chained animal waiting to be let loose. It eased up to pump 3, the one with the chipped handle, and stopped so quietly he barely heard the brakes sigh. The truck was massive, an older Kenworth maybe, but caked so thick in desert dust it was impossible to read the logo or see the plates. The cab windows were coated, black behind the grime, and though Roger waited, expecting the door to open, nobody climbed out. He stepped outside, clutching the receipt paper in one sweaty hand, and called out. No answer. The pump clicked on by itself, digits spinning on the old mechanical counter. The whine of gas flowing into the tank, though he never touched the handle. His breath fogged the night air even though it wasn't cold, and when he glanced back up, the truck was gone. No engine noise, no screech of tires, just gone, as though it had never been there. Roger thought maybe he was losing it, that the night shift was finally chewing at the corners of his mind. But the next night the truck came back. Same time, 1:07 a.m., same pump. Same silent, suffocating presence. Over the weeks that followed, Roger noticed other things. Dark streaks on the concrete that wouldn't wash away, like old blood that soaked deeper the harder he scrubbed. The station lights flickered and buzzed whenever the truck appeared, and the radio in the office hissed with static, whispering voices he couldn't make out. Though sometimes he thought he heard his name, soft and hungry. He tried to mention it to Hank, the day shift guy, but Hank just chuckled and told him he was working too many overnights, needed a day off, maybe a woman to warm his bed. But Roger stayed because he needed the money, because the idea of leaving town felt wrong somehow, like there was a hook buried in his chest, tethering him to the cracked concrete and rusting pumps. Then, in early November, the truck stayed longer. The tail lights glowed in the dark, bright enough to stain the night an angry red, and Roger could see something moving in the cab, a tall shape, thin and jittery. its head nearly scraping the roof. He couldn't look away, even as the air around him turned heavy and thick, like he was breathing through tar. He tried to step back into the office, but his legs wouldn't move. The driver door creaked open, slow and shrill, and what stepped out wasn't human. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs like crooked fence posts, its skin gray and cracked like old mud. Its eyes were the same burning red as the taillights, holes that glowed without blinking, and Roger swore the thing smiled, though it had no mouth, just a jagged split that dripped something dark onto the pavement. The thing pointed one skeletal hand at him, and Roger felt his bones turn to ice, felt something worm its way into his ears and eyes and mouth, filling him with a noise that wasn't quite sound, a low grinding like gears chewing through steel and bone. He blacked out. When he woke, he was inside the office, hours gone, the sunrise bleeding weak light through the dusty windows. His clothes stank of burnt oil, and his hands were streaked with black grime he couldn't scrub away. He thought about quitting, about running, but the road out of Pecos twisted on itself, the desert turning into a labyrinth of cracked asphalt and heat mirages. And every time he tried, he ended up back at the station, the neon dinosaur flickering like a dying firefly. Now, months later, Roger barely sleeps. He waits every night for the truck to come, for the taillights to burn, for the driver door to creak open and something to crawl out and stand beneath the buzzing floodlight, beckoning him closer. He hears the voices in the walls, calling him out, promising he can go with them, that he just has to step into the dark, let the truck take him where the road never ends, where the taillights burn forever and the desert never sleeps. Some nights, he thinks he will. He thinks that maybe that's better than waiting. And when the truck pulls up again, when the pump clicks on by itself, he grips the counter so hard his knuckles crack, and he whispers back to the voices in the static, hoping they'll tell him how to leave, how to escape, how to follow the red lights out into the night and never come back. She never told anyone about the first time it happened, not really. On a Tuesday night, just past 3 a.m, Laura was standing at the nurse's station, flipping through an old chart when the heart monitor in room 9 started to scream. A flatline alarm. She jumped, nearly spilling coffee down her scrubs. Room 9 had been closed for years, the bed stripped, the cabinets empty, but the monitor stayed on because sometimes equipment got shuffled around and no one bothered to disconnect the system properly. They all knew it. But this time, the noise was loud, insistent, and when Laura walked down the hall, the fluorescents buzzing overhead, she could swear she heard breathing. Slow, ragged, uneven breathing, coming from the empty bed where there should have been nothing. The sound stopped the second she stepped into the room. The monitor went dark, the line vanished. She shook it off, told herself it was a glitch, but over the next week it happened again. Same time, 3:07 a.m. Same room, same flatline alarm. No one else was ever around. The hospital was old, half empty, understaffed. Night shift always felt like a dream. But Laura knew she wasn't dreaming. On the 4th night, she stood just outside the doorway when the alarm went off. Her breath caught in her throat. The monitor showed the flatline and the breathing was louder now, wet and close, like someone with fluid in their lungs struggling to stay alive. But there was no one in the bed, just the sheets drawn tight, clean and white, the pillows stacked neatly. And still the sound went on. She watched the empty bed, praying the noise would stop, but instead she heard something else, something worse. A rasping voice, almost a whisper, saying her name. Laura. She froze, eyes stinging, heart hammering. She ran back to the nurse's station, her shoes squeaking on the dull linoleum, and didn't return until morning rounds. Daylight never showed any sign of what had happened. No one believed her. Her supervisor told her to get more sleep. The tech said maybe a radio was picking up interference from an ambulance dispatch, though Laura had been working nights long enough to know what that sounded like. This was different. This was human. And every night it got worse. Soon, it wasn't just breathing or whispering. It was movement under the sheets, faint impressions where legs would be, the shape of a head pressing into the pillow, the monitor pulsing with a heartbeat that wasn't supposed to exist. And then it would stop, the line would flatten, the room would go dead silent. One night, she worked up the nerve to touch the sheet. It was warm, like a body had been lying there, sweating and dying, and staring up at the ceiling. Laura pulled back the sheet, bile rising in her throat, but there was nothing there. Just a dent in the mattress. The next night, she didn't even wait for the alarm. She went into room 9 at 3:05 and waited. The clock on the wall ticked, the second hand skipping slightly every time it passed the 12. At 3:07, the monitor flickered to life, shrieking, and something cold brushed against her arm. She turned, expecting to see someone behind her, but the door was shut, the hall empty. She heard the breathing again, the rattling wetness of it, and for the first time she saw the sheets shift by themselves, the mattress indenting as if an invisible weight had settled in. The monitor changed, showing a spiking heartbeat that was too fast, then too slow, then flat again. She heard her name, louder this time. Laura, help me. She backed away, tears running down her face, but didn't run. Something in her bones told her if she ran, it would follow, that it wanted her to run. So she stayed, staring at the empty bed, whispering back, "What do you want?" The breathing shuddered, the voice croaked, "Don't let me die." The monitor blipped, the line rising and falling in short erratic pulses. She took another step closer. "I can't help you," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know how." A cold hand touched her wrist. She screamed and jerked back. The room went dark. The monitor flatlined. The door swung open by itself. And then there was nothing. No breathing, no heartbeat. Just the creak of the old building settling into silence. After that, she couldn't go into room 9 anymore. But every night, 3:07, the alarm still went off. She would sit at the nurse's station, hands clenched, staring at the dark hallway, waiting for it to stop. Sometimes she heard the voice calling her from down the hall. Sometimes it was closer, almost next to her ear. Her hair would lift like a breeze had touched it, though the air was still. A week later, Laura quit. She didn't leave a note, didn't return calls. She packed her things at dawn, never looked back at the hospital as she drove away. A month later, they say, a new nurse started on night shift. The same alarm went off at 3:07 a.m. They found her sitting on the floor in the hallway, staring at the closed door to room 9, blood leaking from her nose, her eyes wide and empty. She wouldn't speak. They took her away in an ambulance. The heart monitor in room 9 was finally disconnected. But sometimes, when the night is quiet and the halls are empty, the nurses swear they still hear breathing coming from under the sheets, and a voice whispering a name that doesn't belong to anyone alive. The machines in the old plant on the east side of Lubbock never really stopped humming, even in the dead of night when the graveyard shift thinned out, and the fluorescent lights flickered overhead like tired, dying fireflies. Oscar had worked there for 16 years. A man carved from silence and routine, punching in at 10 o'clock sharp and punching out at 6 o'clock. His boots carrying the dust of 1,000 shifts across the concrete floor stained with oil and sweat. The foreman always said you could set your watch by Oscar, that he was the spine of the plant, reliable, predictable, uncomplaining. But that night in October, when the wind whipped the chain link fence out back and the sodium lamps burned low and orange, Oscar walked to the time clock, slid his card in, heard the mechanical thunk, and stepped away into the cold night air. Only he didn't really leave. They found his locker empty the next morning, but the machines in Assembly B kept running, churning out unfinished parts, gears rattling without supervision. The supervisor, Pete, swore he heard Oscar muttering over by the lathe, cursing under his breath the way he did when the cutters got dull. But when Pete walked over, the floor was empty, just the echo of the machines chewing at raw metal. By Friday, it got worse. Men on first shift started whispering about seeing Oscar out of the corner of their eyes, his faded denim shirt, the old green cap he never took off, moving from one machine to another, making adjustments, tinkering, keeping the line going as though his body hadn't walked out 3 nights ago and never come back. They sent a man to Oscar's house. The door was unlocked. His boots were by the back step, his coffee cup in the sink. The bed hadn't been slept in. The old neighbor lady said she'd seen him drive home that night but never saw him leave again. When they checked the car, it was still parked out front, keys in the ignition, the driver's seat cold. But every night at 10 o'clock the machines in Assembly B started humming, sometimes before the rest of the line powered up, like someone was already there tending to them. And the shadows, Pete said, the goddamn shadows, they moved against the walls in ways that made no sense, like men leaning over consoles, bending down to check feeds, standing by the cutter, just at the edge of the light. By the following week, no one wanted to work nights anymore. Pete got on the phone with corporate, said he didn't give a damn what the quarterly numbers looked like. Something was wrong with the line. The suits sent down a specialist, a kid from Dallas with a clipboard and a calm, condescending smile. He spent 2 nights in Assembly B before he stopped showing up. No one saw him leave, but the next morning, the security guard found his clipboard near the lathe, snapped clean in half, pencil still tucked into the coil at the top. His rental car was in the lot, door ajar, keys dangling from the ignition. They hired a priest from St. Catherine's to come out on a Saturday. He walked the floor with a little tin of holy water, flicking droplets onto the gray metal, muttering prayers in Latin under his breath. Halfway across the line, the lights cut out. The priest kept muttering, his voice shaking, the beads of his rosary rattling. Pete said he heard a voice whisper from behind the lathe, "Don't let him take my line." And when the lights flicked back on, the priest was gone. They found his crucifix later, lodged in the intake chute of Machine 3, twisted and bent. Pete shut the line down after that, bolted the doors, padlocked the gates. But the neighbors said they still heard the machines running at night, the whine of motors drifting through the dark. One night, Pete came back with a crowbar, determined to pull the place apart himself, to prove to everyone it was just old wiring, bad bearings, superstition and stress. He unlocked the gates, stepped into Assembly B, and never walked out again. They found his truck idling by the fence the next morning. Driver's door open, crowbar on the floorboard, still warm. Corporate finally sent down a demolition crew, men with hard hats and torches. They lasted 2 days before the foreman quit, screaming that someone kept whispering to him from the rafters. They left the plant standing, the gates chained up, a for sale sign swinging in the wind. Sometimes at night, the hum of machinery still drifts over the empty lot, and the sodium lamps flicker on for a moment, casting long, thin shadows across the concrete floor. The time clock is still mounted by the door, Oscar's last punch-out card still resting in the slot, stamped clean at 6 a.m. on a cold October morning. No one's touched it since, and the machines keep running, long after the men who built them have gone. The night clerk at the old roadside motel off Highway 6 never expected much beyond the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional trucker needing a few hours of sleep before sunrise. The place had been dying for years, but that suited Martin just fine. He liked the quiet. He liked the smell of dust and the rattle of the vending machine that never quite worked. He liked the emptiness, or maybe he'd just gotten used to it. The sign out front flickered half dead, and in the lobby a stained clock above the register ticked so softly it might have been a heartbeat. Martin had been there 3 years, and in that time he'd seen maybe a dozen people a month, mostly passing through. But one night, just after midnight, when the cicadas outside fell into that strange, sudden silence, a man walked in who didn't have a face. Martin saw the silhouette first in the glass door, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a pale coat that looked dusty and too big. He expected the usual nod or grumble, maybe the slow shuffle of feet, but when the man came into the light, Martin's stomach turned. Where there should have been eyes, nose, mouth, there was just smooth flesh, like someone had stretched a thin sheet of skin over a mannequin's head. Martin felt his breath hitch in his throat. He swallowed it back. The man, or the thing, stood there, motionless, as if waiting for Martin to speak. So he did. His voice cracked as he asked, "How many nights?" No answer. Just the faint wheeze of the air conditioner and that hollow feeling in his gut that made his hands sweat. Martin scribbled something on the old paper register. He wrote room 17 and pushed the key across the counter with fingers that trembled. The man reached out, long fingers, too long, and took it without touching Martin's skin. Then he turned and walked back into the dark hallway. Martin didn't sleep that day, though he usually crashed in the small back room once dawn came. Instead, he watched the security monitors, the static crackling over grainy black and white footage of the hallway. Room 17's door stayed closed. Nobody came out. Nobody went in. He thought maybe he was losing his mind, so he checked the register again the next night. Blank, no name, no signature. The key was still gone, but there was no record of anyone staying in 17. He tried calling the room, just silence on the other end, though once he thought he heard a faint rustling, like paper dragging across wood. 2 nights later, he sent Maria, the housekeeper, to check the room while he watched the feed from the camera. He told her to knock. She did, 3 times soft, glancing back at the lens like a child asking permission. Then the door creaked open on its own. Maria peered in. She froze. Her mouth worked soundlessly. Then she staggered back, stumbled over the vacuum cord, and fled down the hall. Martin didn't ask her what she saw. She didn't come back the next day. In the morning, Martin went himself. He walked the length of the hallway, his shoes silent on the thin carpet. He stopped in front of 17. The key was in his pocket, but the door wasn't locked. He pushed it open. The smell hit him first, like old milk and copper. The curtains were drawn, but the room wasn't dark. The light in there was wrong, gray and pulsing. And the bed was made, sheets tucked in so tight they might have been stapled to the mattress. On the pillow was a dent, like someone's head had rested there, but there was no one in the room. He closed the door, locked it, and walked back to the lobby. He crossed out 17 on the register with a shaking pen. He tried to call the manager, no answer. Tried to call the owner, no answer. So he sat at the counter and watched the hallway on the monitor until his eyes burned. That night, at exactly 12:13, the man came back. Or maybe he'd never left. Martin heard the door swing open, the faint scuff of feet. The man stood at the counter again, no face, just that blank slab of pale skin reflecting the flickering neon from outside. Martin whispered, "What do you want?" He didn't expect an answer, and he didn't get one. Instead, the man raised a hand and set the key on the counter, slow and deliberate. Then he turned and walked back into the hallway, but the monitor didn't show him leaving. The door to 17 was open now on the screen, but the room was empty. The bed looked untouched. Martin reached out and picked up the key, but it felt cold, like it had been in a freezer. His fingers stuck to the metal, and he had to peel them away. For the rest of the night, Martin sat staring at the camera feed, at that open doorway where room 17 waited. In the morning, he quit. He left the keys, the register, everything. He drove east until the sun came up. But he never really left the motel. Some nights, when he's alone in cheap apartments in strange towns, he dreams of that hallway, of a room 17, and the man with no face standing in the doorway. The warehouse on the south edge of Amarillo sat on the flat stretch of land between the old cattle yards and the rail spur that hadn't been used in 20 years. It was one of those places built during the boom years, with sheet metal walls and a maze of concrete floors stained by decades of grease and dust. I started working there in the summer, on the night shift, because my brother said the manager didn't check records too hard and the pay was better than cleaning bathrooms at the truck stop. The first night, I thought the place just smelled weird, like old hay and burnt oil, but the foreman, Joe, said it was normal. He showed me the break room, where the coffee pot had a crack in it, and the little monitor room with 4 screens that were supposed to watch the aisles. Joe told me not to wander, just check the cameras and call him if something was wrong. It didn't take long to notice the forklifts. I heard the hum of them moving the first week, echoing off the steel beams like distant thunder. Sometimes I'd step out of the office and see one glide past the end of an aisle. Empty forks gleaming in the pale fluorescent lights, then nothing. Joe said it was the heat causing the circuits to click on, the battery backups triggering themselves. He said that, but he never looked me in the eye when he did. After midnight, the place got colder, the metal sweating in the night air, and the echoes sounded like breathing. Some nights, I'd hear the beep-beep of a forklift backing up, but the cameras would show static or nothing at all. One night, the crates in Bay 7 vanished. I watched them on camera, a stack of wooden boxes filled with spare parts wrapped in plastic. I looked away to the other screen for maybe 20 seconds. When I looked back, the space was empty. I thought I was losing it, that maybe I had mixed up the feed. I walked out there, past rows of pallets, past the idle forklifts sitting like sleeping animals, into Bay 7. Nothing. The floor was dusty, but there were no tracks, no drag marks. I checked the corners, shined my flashlight under the steel racks. Joe wasn't answering his radio, so I called him on my cell. He said he was already out in the truck yard and told me not to bother him unless there was a real problem. The next night, the crates were back. Same position, same torn plastic sheeting, same faded stenciled letters on the side. I asked Joe if he had someone move them, but he just walked away. Later that shift, I saw on camera a forklift driving itself down the main aisle. It turned left at the end, forks raised high, then faded into the shadows by the old conveyor line. I ran out there, the place empty, quiet except for the hum of the overhead lights. I tried telling myself it was a glitch, some old recording bleeding into the feed, but my gut twisted every time I walked past the dark aisle where it disappeared. Then the whispering started. It was subtle at first, like wind moving across the roof, but soon I could hear words, almost. My name, maybe, or something close to it. On the 3rd week, I fell asleep in the guard office, and when I jerked awake, the screens were all black except one. On that one, I saw a shape moving between the racks, something hunched low, dragging something heavy behind it. The footage was grainy, but I could see its arms, too long, scraping the ground. I grabbed the radio and called Joe. No answer. I called again, my voice shaking. I picked up the flashlight and walked out, every step like moving through wet cement. The aisle where I saw the thing was cold, so cold I could see my breath. I stepped over an oil patch, shining my light between the shelves. Nothing. But I heard scraping, the same sound from the footage, coming from deeper in the rows. I called out, but my voice sounded muffled, like I was underwater. Then something clanged to the left, and I swung the light. A pallet had fallen, boxes split open, but the aisle was empty. I felt something brush my shoulder, turned so fast I nearly dropped the light, but nothing was there. I ran back to the office and slammed the door. The screens were all static. I watched until dawn, refusing to move. When Joe came in, I told him everything. He just looked tired, like he'd heard it all before, and told me if I couldn't handle it, I should quit. But I didn't quit. I needed the money. And part of me wanted to see more, to prove I wasn't crazy. A week later, I got my chance. The cameras flickered at midnight, all 4 screens blinking in and out. I saw flashes of crates sliding across the floor on their own, circles with no drivers, dark stains spreading on the concrete and then vanishing. Then the screens went black, and the whispering started in my ear, loud and clear. It wasn't the radio, it was right behind me. I turned around slowly. The break room door was open, though I had closed it earlier. I saw shadows moving inside, jerky like film run at the wrong speed. I stepped closer, my legs numb, and I saw someone standing in the corner, back turned to me. He was in coveralls, same as mine, but the head was wrong, too smooth, like a sack pulled over it. It turned, and I saw it had no face, just a blank stretch of gray skin. I fell back, dropping the light. When I looked again, the room was empty. I don't know why I went back the next night. Maybe because part of me thought if I stayed away, whatever was there would follow me home. I watched the cameras until 3 a.m., then I heard the forklifts starting up again, the beep beep echoing. I saw pallets shifting on their own, crates sliding into the shadows, and something that looked like a person crawling across the floor with its arms twisted behind it. I stayed until dawn again, staring at the screens, barely breathing. When Joe came in, he looked at me and just nodded, like he knew I wasn't going to last much longer. I quit that morning, walked out into the hot sun, and didn't look back. But some nights, when I close my eyes, I still hear the beep beep, still see the pallets moving in the dark, and feel something standing just behind me, breathing slow and steady, waiting for me to turn around. I signed on to the rig off Corpus Christi thinking I'd earn good money and keep my head down. They put me on nights watching the pressure gauges, checking the drill readings, logging hourly reports to the supervisor who barely looked at me. It was a floating platform about 30 miles out in the Gulf, surrounded by endless black water that reflected nothing but the blinking rig lights. The crew was rough, hard drinkers, hard talkers, but they knew what they were doing. I figured if I didn't ask too many questions, I'd blend in, get my pay, and get out. 2 weeks in, something started feeling wrong. Little things at first. I'd hear voices on the radio that weren't call signs I recognized. They were garbled, whispering, almost like breathing pressed up against the speaker. The others brushed it off, said the equipment got weird out here, that salt air and static could make you think you heard things. One night, the drill operator walked past me, pale as bone, said he heard kids laughing down in the mud pit room. We both knew there weren't any kids on the rig. Then, one night, around 2 a.m., I was in the control shack alone. The sea was calm. The rig hummed around me, a deep mechanical throb I'd gotten used to. Then the drill readings spiked for no reason. The vibration monitor went red. The radio on my belt squawked with a burst of static and a voice came through. But it wasn't one of the crew. It was high-pitched, like a woman but broken, almost digital. It said my name. Then it said, below. 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 I froze. Tried to call the floor boss. No answer. All channels were dead. I left the shack, walked across the deck. It was too quiet. Usually there was shouting, banging, the hiss of blow-off valves. Now, just the creak of the rig structure and the slow churn of the Gulf below. Oh, I got to the drill floor. Empty. The drill was still turning, bit grinding deep into rock 2 miles below, but there wasn't a single soul in sight. Tools scattered, some still warm, like they'd just been dropped. I called out, but my voice got swallowed by the hum of machinery. I went below, into the crew quarters. Lights flickered. The hallway smelled of burnt oil and something else, like seawater left in a dead thing. Bunks empty, lockers open. I checked the galley, nothing. It felt like walking through a museum of ghosts. Coffee cups half full on tables, chairs still pulled out, as if people had just vanished mid-sentence. My radio crackled again, same voice. Now it was repeating numbers, ones I didn't understand. I shut it off. I went back up, checked the helipad, no chopper, no flare lights on the horizon. I was alone. I looked out at the water, expecting to see lifeboats drifting. Nothing but black gulf rolling slow and endless in every direction. Then the drill made a grinding noise, deeper than before, like stone screaming. I ran back to the drill floor. The feed was still rotating, but the gauges were going insane, needles pinned in the red. I heard something metallic snap below deck. The platform shuddered, groaned, and over all of it I heard that voice again. Not in the radio this time, but echoing up through the drill shaft itself, whispering, "Below, below, below." I killed the power switch to the drill. Nothing happened. It kept turning. The lights overhead flickered and pulsed with each revolution, casting the rig in strobing shadows. I tried again, hit the emergency shutoff. Nothing. I backed away, breathing fast. The shadows on the wall seemed to stretch and pulse. Then they started to separate, as if something was moving just out of sight. I thought I saw a hand reach out of the shadows near the mud pit, but when I swung my flashlight, there was nothing. Then a pale shape darted behind the derrick ladder. My mind told me to run, to jump into the water and take my chances. But my legs wouldn't move. The drill started to whine. High-pitched, metal on metal, and the floor vibrated so hard it rattled my teeth. I fell to my knees. The voice came again, but now it was all around me, whispering out of every crevice of the rig. It wasn't words anymore, just broken gibberish that made my head pound. The drill floor split, a seam tearing in the steel plating. I swear I saw something wet and glistening under there, moving, like muscle flexing under skin. I don't remember how long I lay there, clutching the steel railing, waiting for the floor to collapse. At some point, everything went silent. I opened my eyes. The drill had stopped. The gauges were dead, the shadows were gone. I stood up, walked the rig again, still no crew, still no sound. I spent the next 2 days alone, ate cold beans out of a can, sat in the radio shack calling Mayday over and over, no answer. I never saw the crew again. The supply chopper came eventually, found me half-mad, sunburned, muttering about voices. They never found the others. The company filed it away, blamed a structural failure, electrical short, whatever helped them sleep at night. I left Corpus Christi that month, took a job stocking shelves in a Walmart in Laredo. I don't go near the water anymore. Some nights when the power cuts out, I still hear that drill turning in the dark. and the voice calling me below, below, below. The night shift was the only time Eddie felt like he belonged. Nobody questioned why he never spoke much, or why he took so long to mop the same patch of floor over and over again. The building was old, built back when Houston was just oil, heat, and ambition rising from the swamps, and every tile in that hallway seemed to creak like a living thing under his cheap black work shoes. He'd started that night like any other, dunking the mop in cloudy water that smelled of sour ammonia, humming tunelessly as he went from one end of the hallway to the other. But the third time he pushed his bucket past the trophy case at the midpoint, he noticed something wrong. The door to the supply closet had vanished. The bright red exit sign at the end flickered, then blinked out entirely, as though someone had cut the power. He stopped and squinted at the gloom. He could still see, but the hallway stretched on like someone had rolled out fresh floor tiles in front of him when he wasn't looking. He told himself he was tired, his mind playing tricks again, but the corridor kept getting longer. The old trophy case, once gathering dust near the elevator, was now 20 paces behind him. He turned to look, sure he'd see the closet door or the dingy fire alarm on the wall. But there was nothing but more hallway, more faintly humming fluorescent lights overhead, and more doors that he didn't recognize. They weren't marked. No brass nameplates, no room numbers, just blank doors in a blank wall, painted the same institutional off-white as the floor. He thought of going back, but when he turned the mop bucket around, the floor seemed to ripple under the wheels. The lights flickered again, and his stomach lurched like he was on a boat. He gripped the mop handle until his knuckles whitened and focused on breathing, telling himself he was okay. It was okay. Just an old building settling and a tired mind unraveling under too much stale coffee and not enough sleep. But as he walked, the lights behind him popped and died, one by one, plunging the corridor into creeping darkness. Eddie felt sweat dripping down his spine, soaking through the cheap polyester of his uniform. He tried a door at random, pulling the handle hard enough it rattled in his grip, but it wouldn't budge. He banged on it, called out, but no one answered. No sound but his own ragged breathing and the squeak of the mop bucket wheel with the chip missing that always wobbled and clacked every rotation. He kept moving forward, not sure what else to do, the corridor stretching ahead of him like a mouth opening wider and wider, waiting to swallow him whole. Eventually, he stopped calling out. His voice sounded strange in that hallway, tinny and hollow, like it was echoing through an empty steel drum. He tried not to look at the doors anymore. Some of them had windows that looked like black glass. Others had strange dents along the frame like something had pounded from the inside. He saw stains on the tile that weren't there before, dark stains like rust or old blood, and he had to fight the compulsion to try and scrub them away. That was what he did, after all. He was the janitor, he cleaned. Even if the stain kept spreading, blooming like a flower under his mop, smelling like rotten meat under the harsh ammonia reek. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time dissolved in that hallway. He couldn't find the end. The lights ahead always just far enough he could barely see where the floor ended and the darkness began, but they never seemed to get closer. He stopped once, just to rest, and when he looked over his shoulder he saw the mop bucket had vanished. He hadn't heard it roll away, but it was gone. He was alone with his mop, clutching the wooden handle so hard he felt splinters cutting into his palm. He almost welcomed the pain. It made him feel real, tethered to something other than this hallway. A door opened beside him without a sound. Eddie froze, staring at the darkness beyond. He couldn't see the floor, couldn't see walls, just emptiness like the mouth of a cave. He stepped closer, half expecting a hand to grab him, something to drag him in, but nothing moved. He looked back down the corridor, hoping to see the cleaning closet, the exit sign, anything familiar. There was nothing. So he stepped inside. The darkness swallowed him, thick as tar, and the door shut behind him with a gentle click that sounded final in his ears. He groped around but felt no walls, no floor, just emptiness that felt cold and wet against his skin. He screamed then, screamed until his throat burned and his voice broke, but the darkness swallowed that too. Then he felt it, a tug on the mop in his hand. He held on, terrified of letting go, but something stronger wrenched it from him, pulling it out into the void. He stumbled after it, tripping, falling forward, expecting to hit ground. Instead, he kept falling, the air rushing past his ears, until he didn't know if he was falling or floating, or if there was any difference anymore. When he woke, he was standing in the hallway again. But it was clean, so clean it looked new. No stains, no flickering lights. The exit sign glowed steady red at the far end. The supply closet was there, just where it should be. He looked down and saw his mop in his hand, his bucket beside him, the wheels squeaking gently as he nudged it forward. He took a step, then another. He felt the floor shift under him, almost like a sigh, and the corridor seemed to stretch just a little further ahead. He didn't look back. He didn't stop. He kept mopping, kept pushing the bucket forward, because that was what he did. That was what he would always do. Somewhere behind him, the lights began to flicker out again, one by one. It started the way most nights in the ER start in Austin, with the stink of bleach and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the occasional metallic clang of a dropped instrument echoing through the halls. Dr. Cal Harris had been on shift since 7, pushing 12 hours straight, barely stopping long enough to piss. He had a coffee cooling on the counter beside the intake window, untouched, when the double doors slammed open just before midnight, and a gurney rolled in on its own, wheels squealing across the polished linoleum. No one was pushing it. No paramedics, no nurses, nobody at all. Just a mangled body strapped down, blood soaking the sheets, congealing in thick black puddles that dripped off the edge and stained the floor behind it. Cal froze. He was alone at the nurse's station, the rest of the overnight team scrambling with a multi-car pileup that had arrived 30 minutes earlier. He stepped forward, calling out, but there was nothing. No radio crackle, no chatter from paramedics, just the wet, sticky sound of blood dripping. He glanced at the chart clipped to the side, but it was blank. No name, no vitals, just empty lines. The man on the table, it had to be a man, from the size of the torso, had a hole in his stomach big enough to fit a fist through, and something pulsing wetly just beneath the torn skin. Cal felt a bead of sweat roll down his neck. He knew he should wait, call for help, but something about the gurney, about the blood trail stretching back into the shadows of the ambulance bay, felt urgent. He wheeled it straight into operating room 3, flipping on the harsh surgical lights that glared off the chrome surfaces and made the shadows in the corners seem deeper, hungrier. He washed up quickly, gloved, masked, ignoring the whisper that tickled at the edge of his hearing. A faint breath, almost like someone murmuring his name, though the room was empty except for him and the dying man on the table. He cut away the soaked fabric, exposing muscle, bone, and something dark that twitched, almost as if it were alive, curling toward his scalpel. Cal blinked hard. That wasn't possible. He leaned in, the overhead lamp bright and hot on the exposed cavity. The thing moved again, faster, retracting deeper into the man's guts. Cal tried to clamp the bleeder, but the blood wouldn't stop. It pumped out, thick and black, coating his hands, slicking the floor so badly he nearly slipped when he stepped back to grab more gauze. The murmuring grew louder, turning into a hiss, like dozens of voices all whispering from somewhere beneath the tile floor. He ignored it, pressing down, working by feel alone. The patient's heart monitor wasn't beeping. It wasn't even hooked up. There was no IV, no paperwork, no blood type, nothing. Just him, the blood, and the impossible squirming thing inside the man's gut. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, and went out. Cal swore, groping for the portable lamp on the tray, fumbling with the switch. When they came back on a few seconds later, the table was empty. The restraints lay open, slick with blood, and the body was gone. But the blood was still there, fresh and wet, puddling on the tile and dripping onto his shoes. He staggered back, staring at the doorway, half expecting the patient to come stumbling back in, but the hall beyond was silent and empty. The whispers stopped. The only sound was his own breathing, ragged and shallow. He tore off his gloves, ran into the hall, but the security cameras at the nurses' station showed nothing. The footage from the ambulance bay showed only static black and white fuzz where the gurney should have been. He rewound again and again, but the stretcher never appeared. Just empty concrete until the doors swung open by themselves. That night, he mopped up the blood himself. The janitor refused to go into OR 3, said he heard someone breathing in there even with the lights on. Cal didn't argue. He finished his shift, went home, scrubbed his hands until the skin was raw, but he could still smell the copper stink under his nails. Over the next week, things got worse. Patients came in with injuries that didn't make sense, burns that didn't blister, cuts that seemed to go too deep but bled too little. A man who swore he'd been stabbed but had no wound, only blood seeping from his mouth that never stopped. Every time Cal stepped into OR 3, the room felt colder, the shadows heavier. He started hearing the whispers even in the break room, in the bathroom, at home when he tried to sleep. One night, he snapped. He stayed late, alone, waiting by the ambulance bay with the doors propped open, watching the parking lot under the flickering sodium lights. The whispers crawled over his skin, scratching at his ears, calling his name again and again. And then the gurney rolled in, exactly as before, empty except for the blood-stained sheet and the faint outline of a man writhing under the cloth. He followed it into OR 3, hands trembling. He didn't bother washing this time, didn't bother with gloves or masks. He just pulled back the sheet, expecting the ruin of guts and muscle he'd seen before. But there was nothing there, just a hollow black void in the center of the table, sucking the light out of the room, growing wider, pulsing. The whispers turned into screams, dozens of voices shrieking all at once, and he felt the floor tilt under him, felt something grab his wrist and pull. When they found him the next morning, he was unconscious on the floor of operating room 3, blood smeared in handprints all around the table, as if something had been trying to drag him into the dark. They said there was no sign of a patient, no sign of a gurney, nothing on the cameras except him standing alone, talking to himself before collapsing. He doesn't work there anymore. They sent him home, medicated, told him he was exhausted, hallucinating. But at night, he still hears the gurney wheels squealing in the dark, still sees the empty bed rolling through the door, still smells the blood soaking into the tile. And every time he closes his eyes, he sees the hole in the world widening, hungry, whispering his name. The top floor had been sealed off after the fire back in 1983. That's what they told Mark when he took the overnight security job at the old Paramount building on Commerce Street, just a block down from the deserted bus station that still stank of stale urine and old sweat. The place had been sold and resold over the decades, but the top floor never reopened. Some said it wasn't structurally sound after the fire gutted the West Wing offices. Others muttered about insurance or zoning. but mostly people just stopped talking about it. They walled it off, bricked the elevator doors shut on 12, sealed the stairwell with iron plates, and the world moved on. Mark didn't believe in ghosts or curses or any of that bullshit. He believed in paychecks, in cheap coffee, and in doing his rounds without questions because questions got you noticed, and noticed got you fired. His shift ran from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. Just him and the dull hum of fluorescence, the squeak of his worn boots echoing through the marble lobby. He had a small office tucked beside the elevator bank, with 3 grainy security monitors that mostly showed empty hallways. Sometimes junkies tried to sneak in through the loading dock doors, and sometimes kids dared each other to press against the glass on the ground floor and make faces. That was the extent of Mark's excitement until the night he heard the elevator ding. He was hunched over his thermos, watching the second hand crawl toward 2 a.m. when the sound broke the monotony. A soft electronic chime, the same one he'd heard 100 times when tenants rode the elevator to the lobby, but he knew the building was empty. He'd checked every floor at midnight, locked every side door. He leaned out into the hall. The lobby was empty, but the elevator light was on. He watched, confused, as the old digital panel flickered to 12, then went dark. His first thought was a glitch in the system, maybe a short in the old wiring. He stepped closer, peering at the seam where the elevator doors met the concrete wall that covered the entrance on 12. It couldn't go there, that floor was sealed. Another ding. Mark jumped. Then came the screaming. It wasn't mechanical shrieking or metal on metal. It was human. High, ragged, rising and falling like someone being dragged across hot coals, echoing down the shaft as if the building itself was a throat vomiting up agony. Then silence. He stood frozen, hand against the closed door, feeling the cold steel hum beneath his palm. He muttered to himself, told himself it was just a rat caught in machinery, some old speaker wire sparking in the walls. He checked the breaker room, checked the elevator controls. Nothing. Dead quiet. But at exactly 2 a.m. the next night it happened again. The ding, the screaming. It didn't stop this time. It kept on for nearly a minute, the voice breaking into a wet gargle before dying off. Mark smelled smoke in the hall, though there was no fire, saw ash drifting from nowhere. He didn't report it. Who would believe him? He told himself it was stress, a trick of bad lighting, fatigue. But he couldn't sleep during the day anymore. He sat in his rented room off Gaston Avenue, chain-smoking, ears ringing with phantom shrieks. He'd seen the building's records when he was first hired, flipped through old incident reports out of boredom. The fire had started at 12. Some say it was faulty wiring. Others said it was arson. A dozen people had died, trapped in offices as the hallway ceiling caved in, blocking the stairs and cutting power to the elevator. They'd found the bodies huddled against blackened doors, claw marks on the floor. One woman's nails had been ripped off entirely, stuck in the old carpet. Sometimes at night, Mark imagined he could hear them clawing at the elevator walls, begging him to open them up. The third night, the elevator moved again. This time, the doors opened in the lobby, slowly, so painfully slow he could hear the old cables grinding in the shaft. The car was empty, but the floor was wet with soot and the coppery stink of blood. A dark smear led from the elevator across the marble toward the back offices. Mark followed it, step by step, though every cell in his body screamed to turn around. The smear vanished past the mailroom door. When he flung it open, there was nothing inside but stacked boxes and stale air. He washed the floor, threw away the mop, didn't say a word to the day shift. That night, 2 a.m., the elevator dinged again. Mark didn't move. He sat in his little office, staring at the monitors. The screaming echoed through the building until his ears bled, trickling red down his collar. He stuffed wads of tissue into his ears, but he still heard them. A chorus of a dozen voices, wailing, burning. The cameras fuzzed and flickered. He saw shadows on the upper floors, shapes of people stumbling through black smoke, flesh peeling from bone. He saw a woman with half her face melted into her skull, dragging herself along the hallway, looking straight into the camera. He tried to shut it off. The power button did nothing. He pulled the plug from the wall. The monitors stayed on. And then the elevator dinged behind him. He turned. The doors were open, the car dark as a tomb. And deep inside, someone whispered his name. He staggered back, heart pounding, the taste of iron thick in his mouth. Then the doors slid shut. Mark ran that night, didn't bother clocking out, didn't wait for dawn. He took the stairs 3 at a time, burst out into the muggy Dallas night and kept running until his lungs burned. The company called him the next day, left messages he never returned. They docked his pay, threatened legal action. But Mark didn't care. He knew what he heard. He knew what waited in that elevator every night at 2 a.m. Weeks later, he saw the building on the news. A vagrant had been found dead in the lobby, body burned black as charcoal, though there was no sign of fire damage around him. Police said maybe he'd been set on fire elsewhere, but Mark knew. The elevator was in the background of the news footage, doors partly open. And for just a second, he saw something standing inside, watching. A face without skin, eyes melted to yellow pulp. Mark turned off the TV, shut the blinds, and stuffed towels under the door to keep the smell of smoke out. He still dreams of the elevator ding. He wakes up sweating at 2 a.m., ears ringing with screams that never fade, no matter how many miles he puts between himself and the Paramount building. And sometimes, in the dead hour before dawn, he swears he can hear that soft electronic chime outside his window. The sound of the doors sliding open to let something step out. Something that's come looking for him. It started sometime in late summer, right after that stretch of dry lightning storms that set brush fires from Midland to the edge of Odessa, when the wind never seemed to stop whispering through the power lines above Route 385. Hank had been cooking at Red Jake's truck stop for going on 17 years, flipping eggs, scraping grease off the grill, topping off endless mugs of burnt coffee. Nothing much changed out there in the cracked stretch of a highway that ran past the diner's wide plate glass windows, except maybe the occasional new rig or a trucker he hadn't seen before. But this was different. This was wrong. It started one night on the graveyard shift. Hank noticed the first order slip flutter through the pickup window around 2:30 a.m. He called out to the empty diner, thinking maybe some cowboy had snuck in while he was cleaning the griddle, but there was nobody out front. He shrugged, figured maybe the printer had glitched, but he made the order anyway. Sausage, eggs over hard, black coffee. When he slid the plate onto the pass-through, the bell above the door never rang. Nobody stepped up to the counter, but 15 minutes later the plate was back. Empty, smears of yolk and globs of grease, half frozen on the china, like the plate had been dumped in an ice chest. Hank told himself he was tired. He blamed the coffee, the late hour, the endless stretch of empty booths and buzzing neon. But it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Some slips had names scrawled on them in handwriting he didn't recognize, all thin, angular letters that cut across the paper like claw marks. Orders for bacon, eggs, hash browns, stacks of pancakes. He never saw a face, never heard the bell above the door ring, but always the plates came back empty. The food eaten but cold grease clinging to the rim, like whatever had eaten it didn't put off any heat at all. Hank started locking the doors after midnight, turning the sign to closed, hoping to keep out whatever trick his mind was playing on him. But still, the slips came through, sliding from the printer with a hiss that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He tried ignoring them at first, but the smell of burning grease filled the kitchen anyway, the sizzling popping on the grill like something was cooking itself. When he finally turned around, the food was already there, each plate arranged exactly as ordered, waiting to be sent out. And still, the plates returned empty, cold as death. Then the voices started. At first, just the scrape of chair legs against the linoleum floor, or the soft clink of a fork tapping against a plate. Then, low murmurs, dry whispers that seemed to curl around the edges of his hearing, half laughs, snatches of conversation that drifted away when he turned his head. Hank took to humming to himself, singing old country ballads under his breath to drown it out. But he never quite could. One night, near the tail end of August, he caught sight of them. Or at least he thought he did. There were shadows in the diner that didn't belong to any tables or chairs, shifting across the booths like spilled ink. And sometimes, just at the edge of his vision, he saw the outline of a hand, long-fingered and black as soot, reaching for a coffee cup, or the glint of something like eyes reflecting the dim, fluorescent light. Every time he blinked, they were gone, but the plates still returned, scraped clean and cold. Sleep started to slip away from Hank. He stopped going home after his shift, instead laying his head down on the stainless steel counter in the back room and drifting in and out of nightmare-flecked naps where the hiss of the fryer turned into snarling laughter. When he woke, the smell of cooked meat hung in the air, though he couldn't remember standing at the grill. One morning, he found his apron covered in black streaks, greasy handprints he hadn't put there. He called his sister in Dallas once, tried to tell her about the shadows, about the plates, but his voice sounded thin, distant even to his own ears. She said he should see a doctor, that maybe it was his blood sugar, maybe something worse. He promised he would, but he didn't. He couldn't leave the diner. Something about the way the shadows shifted when he walked toward the door made his skin crawl, like they were waiting for him to turn his back. In the second week of September, the order slips started asking for things he didn't recognize. Words he couldn't pronounce, long strings of letters that looked foreign, almost runic. The first night he ignored them, but the grill switched on anyway. The spatula jumped in his hand, and he found himself cooking something that smelled like burnt hair and salt water. When he served it, he heard the shadows sigh in unison, a rustling sound like wind through dead leaves. He didn't want to see what they were, didn't want to know what he was feeding, but he kept cooking. He had to. His hands wouldn't stop. His body moved on its own, working the grill, pulling slip after slip from the printer, setting plate after plate in the pass-through. And every time he tried to stop, tried to step away, he felt a pressure at his back, cold and heavy, pushing him toward the stove. The lights began to flicker, fluorescence sputtering, casting the diner in momentary darkness where the shadows seemed to swell, rising from the booths like thick smoke, spreading across the tile floor in long, writhing tendrils. The air grew colder every night, his breath frosting in front of his face, and still the orders came, each slip edged with black, the letters smearing like wet ash when he touched them. He doesn't know when he stopped leaving the diner altogether. Maybe it was the night he saw the shape behind the counter, tall and thin, skin the color of old oil stains, its mouth opening too wide in a grin that showed row after row of jagged, broken teeth. Or maybe it was the night he heard the voices call his name, over and over, like a chant, a hymn from someplace deep and hollow. Now, Hank doesn't think about days or nights. The clock on the wall stopped weeks ago. He just cooks, hands slick with sweat and grease, and something darker, eyes half shut, throat raw from the heat and the smoke. The slips come faster now, dozens at a time, and the diner is never empty, not really, though he doesn't look out at the booths anymore. He doesn't want to see the things sitting there, waiting, mouths open and empty, eyes like holes bored into the night. He knows he can't stop. He knows he belongs here now, with them, part of whatever hungry thing they are, serving them plate after plate, keeping their hunger at bay, at least for now. And sometimes, just before he passes out from exhaustion on the greasy tile, he thinks he hears them whisper, "Thank you," like a reward, like a promise. And he knows when he finally falls there won't be anything left of him but the cold grease smeared across the empty plates. It began on a moonless night. The desert so dark and wide it felt like standing at the edge of the world. Ranger Tom had been patrolling Big Bend for over a decade, had seen brush fires turn the sky blood red, had watched mountain lions slip between boulders like living shadows, but nothing prepared him for the voices that crackled over his radio that August night. They came softly at first, barely a whisper threaded through static, a woman's voice trembling. "Hello, anyone. Please, help us." Tom blinked in confusion, checked the radio's frequency, thinking maybe it was a stray call from Terlingua or some lost hiker in the canyons, but the voice faded before he could respond. He shrugged it off, but an hour later, another voice came. This time, a man, frantic, gasping. "It's outside. It's in the trees. Please, God, help!" Tom grabbed his flashlight and rifle and drove out toward the Rio Grande campsites, headlights sweeping across pale gravel roads and the black, endless desert beyond. He found nothing. Campsites abandoned, tents slashed, fire pits cold as the grave. There were no fresh tracks, no blood, no sign of where the campers had gone. Only the whisper of wind through the creosote bushes and the sound of his own breath, harsh in the silence. When he returned to the station exhausted, the radio hissed again. This time the voices knew his name. "Tom, help us, Tom, it's coming." His blood froze. He hadn't told anyone he was out there. He hadn't spoken his name. He snatched up the mic and called back, demanded answers, but there was only a soft, rattling laugh, and then the radio fell silent. The next night, the call started earlier. He drove out again, searching every campsite, finding more torn tents, more empty chairs, more cold ashes. At one site, he found the remains of a meal still steaming, as if the campers had vanished just moments before. His flashlight beam swept across twisted sleeping bags, over ground disturbed by scuffed footprints that stopped abruptly, as though the owners had been lifted away. He radioed for help, but there was no answer. No one at headquarters, no chatter from other rangers. Only the hiss of static, punctuated by soft, wet breathing. "Tom, Tom, it's right behind you." He spun, nearly dropping his light. The desert lay still, stars glittering overhead like broken glass. But the air felt heavy, pressing in on him, thick with the smell of rot and burned plastic. He stayed out until dawn, his eyes red, his hands trembling. The third night, he didn't bother returning to the station. He parked his truck near the center of the campground, shotgun across his knees, staring into the black tangle of brush and rock. The radio never stopped. Voices whimpered, screamed, begged, sometimes laughed, sometimes spoke in a language he didn't understand. A guttural hiss that made his skin crawl. He started seeing shapes moving between the mesquite trees, dark figures flickering at the edge of his headlights, gone when he blinked. His flashlight beam caught pale glints, like bone, like teeth. He heard something scratching against the truck's doors, soft at first, then harder, claws dragging along the metal. But when he jumped out, Gun raised, there was nothing there, only desert stretching on forever. Days passed, or maybe weeks. He stopped checking his watch, stopped marking the calendar on the station wall. He didn't sleep, he didn't eat. He just listened to the voices calling his name, whispering about the thing crawling closer, the thing that wanted him to come out, the thing that wanted him to see it. And every night the calls grew clearer. Tom, please, we see you. It wants you, Tom. He tried to call the outside world, tried his cell, the satellite phone, but every screen stayed dark, lifeless. The park was cut off, swallowed whole by something he couldn't name. He didn't dare leave the truck anymore, not even to piss. He pissed in old bottles, eyes fixed on the horizon, watching the desert twist and shift under the baking sun and the cold moon. On the 7th night, at least he thought it was the 7th, he heard footsteps outside, soft, dragging. He clutched the shotgun, finger on the trigger, sweat dripping into his eyes. A shape moved past the window, tall, hunched, something scraping across the gravel, leaving a trail like a slug. He nearly fired, but something in his gut told him not to, that if he made a sound, it would come through the glass. So he stayed silent, breath held, while the thing circled the truck, tapping on the windows, claws clicking like bone on glass. The radio hissed, voices rising to a shriek. "Tom! Tom! It sees you! It sees you!" Then silence. When dawn finally broke, the shape was gone, but the gravel was torn up all around the truck, as though something massive had dragged itself around and around, searching for a way in. Now Tom waits. He knows it's only a matter of time. The radio crackles constantly. Sometimes the voices sound like people he knew, his brother, his old boss, campers he'd helped rescue in flash floods years ago. Sometimes they whisper soft promises. "Just come out, Tom. It's so tired of waiting." He doesn't move, he doesn't blink. He just stares into the desert, the barrel of the shotgun resting on his thigh, finger on the trigger. He knows there's nothing left out there but the thing waiting to eat his face, to crawl into his skin, to take his place behind the radio mic. And when that happens, the next ranger to answer the call will find nothing but cold ashes, torn tents, and a voice on the line whispering his name. Danny never liked working nights in Huntsville, but after 8 years he told himself he was used to it. The clank of metal gates, the constant hum of the old fluorescent lights, the low murmur of prisoners talking through walls that were never quite thick enough. The place smelled like bleach and rust, no matter how often they scrubbed the floors. On paper, Huntsville was a machine that ran smooth. 236 inmates always accounted for, every shift logged down to the minute. But the machine had teeth, and everyone who worked there long enough felt them eventually. The first time the count was off, Danny thought maybe he'd misread the sheet. It was near the end of his shift, the sun just starting to rise and paint the tops of the watchtowers in pale orange light. He was in the control room, sipping burnt coffee, flipping through the security feeds out of habit. The cameras on C Block were fuzzy, the old wires crackling with static every time a radio squawked. But through the static he saw something that made him set his coffee down so hard it sloshed over the rim. He leaned in, squinting. There, in the last cell, 41, something was swaying back and forth. A figure, dark and thin, moving in a slow, unsteady rhythm like it was caught in a breeze. Except there was no breeze in there, no vents, no broken window. The place was airtight. He radioed Oscar on the tier, asked him to check 41. Oscar paused, said 41 had been empty since the last transfer 3 months ago. Danny told him to humor him, just look. He watched on the screen as Oscar shone his light into the cell, keys rattling in his other hand. Danny saw the flashlight beam sweep across the cracked floor, over the stained cot, over the wall scrawled with old gang symbols. Empty. Danny wanted to believe it, but when Oscar moved on, the camera flickered and the shape was there again, closer to the bars this time, just a hint of something pale and wet where a face should be. Danny told himself it was fatigue. He hadn't slept much the past few nights, the nightmares waking him at odd hours. Always the same dream, walking the tier alone, hearing footsteps behind him, turning to see nothing but darkness that swallowed the world. The next night the count was off again, 237. Danny's hand shook as he scribbled the number into the logbook. He looked at the screen, heart pounding. The shape was there, taller now, its head brushing the low ceiling of the cell, arms so long they nearly dragged across the floor. He didn't tell Oscar this time. He didn't tell anyone. When the shift ended, he sat in his truck in the parking lot until the sun was high, smoking one cigarette after another, watching the white stone walls of the prison gleam under the morning light. By the end of the week, the shape started moving. Danny watched it on the cameras, breath caught in his throat, as it drifted back and forth behind the bars, sometimes stopping to lean its face, if you could call that empty, pulpy thing a face, against the metal. It left a dark smear like grease or old blood that never showed up when anyone went to check the cell in person. One night, while Danny was walking the tier alone, keys jangling in his hand, he heard breathing behind him. Slow, ragged, like someone with a collapsed lung. He spun around, light dancing across empty bars, but the sound continued, growing louder, closer, until he felt hot breath against his neck. He ran, then sprinted down the hallway, shoulder slamming the security door so hard he nearly dislocated it. In the break room, he sat shaking, staring at the keys in his hand, listening as the other guards whispered about hearing voices in the night, strange sounds from empty cells. The warden called him into the office 2 days later, asked if he was okay. Danny nodded, eyes sunken and bloodshot. The warden told him to take a week off. Danny refused. He couldn't leave. Not now. That night, the camera showed 238. Danny didn't log it. He just sat there, watching the shape in cell 41 as it twisted and writhed, mouth opening too wide, revealing teeth that looked like broken glass jammed into raw gum. Its eyes were pits, bottomless holes that stared through the camera and into Danny, freezing him to his chair. Sometimes, in the hiss of the old speakers, he heard it whisper his name. Danny. Danny. He stopped going home after that. Slept in the break room, shotgun resting against his shoulder, radio crackling by his ear. The night before the count went to 239, the cell door rattled so hard it shook the floor. Danny watched the camera, sweat dripping into his eyes, as the shape pressed against the bars, arms reaching through, fingers black and oozing something thick and dark. He heard his name again, loud this time, echoing through the empty tier. He doesn't know how long it's been now. The sun still rises, but he doesn't see it. He just stares at the monitor, watching the number grow. 240, 241. The warden stopped calling. The other guards stopped showing up. Huntsville is silent except for the breathing, the scratching at the door behind him, the voice whispering, "Open up, Danny, let us out." But he can't. If he does, he knows they'll spill into the halls, into the world, and there will be no place left untouched. So he sits, shotgun trembling in his lap, radio dead, cameras flickering, the count growing higher each night, waiting for the moment when the last door opens on its own and something cold and wet wraps around his neck from behind. It started on a rainy Thursday, the kind of Beaumont morning where the sky hangs low and gray over cracked pavement, the gutters choked with dead leaves. Clara had been filling prescriptions at Halloran's pharmacy for 20 years, knew every regular by name, knew their children, their parents, even the ones long dead whose pictures still hung on the walls. The first order came through the digital system at 5:15 a.m., just as Clara was wiping down the counters and switching on the back lights. It was a refill request, morphine sulfate, from a patient named Douglas Carter. The name nagged at her memory. She pulled the file and felt her hands go cold. Douglas Carter had died in 1982, heart attack, buried in Oak Lawn Cemetery just outside town. She'd helped fill his prescriptions for years. War veteran, bad lungs, polite smile, always left a quarter in the tip jar, but he'd been dead 43 years. She told herself it was a glitch, maybe a prank by the new tech support kid. She deleted the order and went on with her morning. But the next day, there were 3 new requests waiting in the system. One for phenobarbital, one for chloral hydrate, one for laudanum. She hadn't seen those drugs prescribed in decades, not since the state cracked down on the old doctors who ran script mills out of rundown strip malls. The names on the orders were worse. People she'd buried in her memory, regulars who'd died off one by one. Margaret Lowe, stroke in 1994. Henry Sims, car wreck in 89. Thomas Bright, lung cancer in 76. Their birth dates were correct. Their addresses matched the old paper files still kept in the dusty cabinet in the back. But there they were, scrolling across the screen, new prescriptions, waiting to be filled. She told the owner, Mr. Halloran, a pale man who spent most of his time smoking in the alley behind the store. He just shrugged, told her maybe the system was glitching, that he'd call the software company if it got worse. Clara could see he didn't really care. He was half blind, half drunk, and just wanted the place to limp along long enough to sell it. That night, as the rain hammered the windows, she stayed late, staring at the screen, watching more orders appear. The timestamps were always just a few seconds apart, like the system was being fed from some other place, some other time. The names on the list were worse now. Her old teacher from high school, her mother's bridge partner, the janitor who used to sweep the aisles at night when she first started. When she tried to delete them, the cursor froze. The machine hissed softly, the hum of the ancient refrigerator in the back room rising in pitch until it became a shrill whine. Then the phone rang. She picked up, heart pounding, half expecting static. But a voice whispered on the line, soft, ragged, the syllables blurred by age or distance. "Fill them," it said. "We've been waiting so long." She slammed the phone down, turned off the lights, fled into the rain. But the next morning, the orders were still there, more of them now, dozens. The list scrolling endlessly across the dusty old monitor, dates stretching back a century. She tried unplugging the computer, but the screen stayed on, the glow cold and gray like a winter moon. That night she heard them. Soft footsteps in the aisles, the faint rustle of paper prescription slips pulled from drawers, the jingle of the old brass bell above the front door, though the door never opened. When she looked, the aisles were empty, but the smell of stale cologne and old cigarette smoke lingered in the air. Smells she remembered from decades past, from people long buried in the red clay just beyond town. She tried to quit, but Halloran just laughed, told her to stop letting the late shift get to her, that she needed the paycheck as bad as he did. So she stayed. She started filling the prescriptions, measuring out the morphine, the phenobarb, the laudanum into dusty brown bottles, scribbling the old names onto yellowed labels with trembling hands. Every time she placed a bottle on the counter, the bell above the door jangled faintly, though the door never moved. When she checked, the bottles were gone. She didn't sleep anymore. The phone rang at odd hours, voices whispering thank you, voices coughing, laughing, murmuring from under damp earth. One morning, around 3 a.m., she saw them. Shadows at the edge of the aisles, bent shapes with sunken cheeks and pale, lidless eyes, hands curled around the corners of shelves. They didn't come closer, just waited, watching her work, whispering in a language that sounded like bone scraping across glass. The last time she checked the order log, the names had stopped scrolling. Instead, there was just one word, blinking in the middle of the screen, Heron. Now she doesn't leave the store. She moves between the shelves, refilling ghostly bottles, answering the phone when it rings. Always the same voices on the line, always the same words. "It's your turn, Clara. Fill the prescription." She knows they're waiting in the dark, just beyond the reach of the fluorescent lights. And she knows that when the bottles are gone, when the final slip is filed away, they'll come for her. Their cold hands eager, their eyes empty and hungry. But until then, she works. Because that's what she's always done. And in the end, it's the only thing left to do. He took the job because it was easy, steady, paid just enough to keep the lights on in his one-bedroom apartment off Broadway. Nights in the Galveston Superstore were quiet. Too quiet, maybe. Nothing but the hum of the old refrigeration units and frozen foods, the squeak of his cartwheels, the soft shuffle of boxes being cut open and shelves being stocked, hour after hour under the cold fluorescent glare. His name was Mike. He'd been working graveyard shifts for 3 months when he started noticing the shelves didn't stay put. He'd wheel a pallet into aisle 14, canned vegetables, cereal, paper goods, and pause to scan the UPC labels on the overhead sign. But when he turned back, the shelves had moved. Not far, just a foot or so to the side, but enough to make him doubt himself. He told himself he was tired. He'd been pulling doubles, drinking too much coffee, sometimes nodding off in the back stockroom for minutes at a time, dreams thick and murky with static and whispering voices. Then he started hearing footsteps behind him. Slow, deliberate, never hurrying. They stopped when he turned around, started again the second he looked away. Sometimes he heard breathing too, a wet, ragged sound, like someone with water in their lungs. He told the manager, Brent, but Brent just laughed, said the night shift messed with everyone eventually. He gave Mike an extra 5-minute break and told him to quit drinking so much caffeine. But it got worse. One night, he came back from the bathroom and found the entire aisle of detergent moved into the next section. The floor gouged where the shelving units had scraped across the tiles. The cameras showed nothing, just empty aisles, flickering under the hum of the lights. Then the voices started. At first, they were just on the edge of hearing, soft murmurs, snatches of words he couldn't quite make out. Then they grew louder, whispering his name, telling him to look down the next aisle, to come closer, to watch. He did, and he saw them. Shadows that didn't belong to any fixtures or boxes, dark forms that stretched and twisted as they moved, long arms reaching for him when he blinked. Once he heard a giggle, soft and childish, echoing from the baby formula section. He stopped sleeping altogether. He worked straight through, hollow-eyed, fingers raw from slicing open boxes. He left the store just before dawn, blinking against the sunlight, dreading the next night. Then one night he turned and the shelves weren't there anymore. Just a long, dark hallway where frozen foods used to be, the floor sticky, the air thick with a rotting, salty smell. He heard something breathing in the dark, felt the floor shift under his feet as though the building itself was pulsing like a living thing. He ran. He doesn't remember how he got outside, just that he was standing in the parking lot, panting, hands bleeding from where he'd scraped them on something rough and wet in the dark. He tried to quit. Brent wouldn't let him, said they were short-staffed, that Mike had to cover the weekend shifts. So he went back. Now he doesn't bother stalking anymore. He just wanders the aisles, flashlight flickering, listening to the shelves scrape across the floor when he turns away, watching the dark spaces between them grow wider, deeper, like the mouth of something enormous opening beneath the store. Sometimes he sees faces in the glass doors of the freezer cases, bloated, pale, eyes black and empty. They smile at him, whispering things he doesn't want to understand. And every night the store feels less like a building and more like a trap, the aisles shifting, closing behind him, leading him deeper into the dark where the breathing grows louder and the footsteps match his own. He knows there's no way out anymore. The exits are gone. The windows show nothing but endless black. So he keeps moving, because if he stops, he knows they'll catch him, drag him into the cold spaces between the shelves, where the air stinks of salt and rot and the voices never stop whispering his name. It started sometime in mid-July, when the nights out in Abilene hung heavy with heat, and the cicadas screamed like dying metal in the trees behind the garage. Travis had been working late shifts at Jenkins Auto for years, the kind of place where the radio crackled old country, and the coffee pot burned tar in the corner until the glass decanter cracked. He liked it that way, quiet, predictable, just the groan of the lift and the steady tick of cooling engines after a job was done. He didn't mind being alone. He'd been alone most of his life, and the hum of fluorescent lights felt like company enough. It was near midnight the first time he found the keys. They were sitting on the old red counter next to the register. A ring of dull brass with a rabbit's foot charm, stained and matted with something dark. No note, no customer. He peered out into the gravel lot beyond the bay door, but there was nothing but heat haze under the sodium lamps and the thick dark beyond the fence where the highway pulsed faintly with the occasional passing semi. He called out half-heartedly, but no answer came. Shrugging, he slipped the keys into the drawer under the register. Maybe someone left them earlier. Maybe he just didn't remember. He was tired. He'd been tired for months. The next night they were back. Different set this time, with a cracked plastic keychain shaped like a skull. Again, no note, no customer, just the keys sitting there, cold to the touch despite the sweat that slicked his palms. That was the same night he heard the first engine start itself. He was under the hood of a '99 Silverado, tightening the manifold bolts, when the sound came from the bay next door. The cough and rumble of a V6 roaring to life, stuttering like it hadn't been run in years. He dropped the wrench, metal clanging against concrete, and nearly cracked his head on the hood when he jerked upright. "Who's there?" he called out. But there was no answer, just the steady thump of pistons firing in the dark. When he stepped into the bay, the air smelled thick with exhaust, sharp and greasy, but the space was empty. No headlights, no running motor. Nothing but the stale sweat smell of the summer night pressing through the open door and the faint whine of the radio static in the corner. He shut everything down early that night, fumbling with the switch on the breaker panel, and left without looking back. He told himself he was overworked, that maybe he needed to switch to day shifts, maybe see a doctor about the migraines that had been dancing behind his eyes for weeks. But he didn't. By the third night, the grease streaks started appearing on the walls. Long smudges, thick and dark, dragged in claw-like curves along the concrete where no one should have touched. He scrubbed them off, cursing under his breath, but by morning they were back, sometimes spelling shapes he couldn't quite name, curling patterns that made his stomach twist when he stared at them too long. The keys kept showing up every night, sometimes 3 or 4 sets at a time, piled in a silent heap on the counter. He stopped touching them, stopped even looking at them. But they still came. And the engines, they started on their own now, night after night, roaring to life behind him as he worked, revving hard enough to rattle the air compressor and shake tools off their hooks. But when he looked, the bays were empty. He started carrying the old shop shotgun with him, shells rattling in the loops on the stock, though deep down he knew it wouldn't help. The air grew thick and greasy, the smell clinging to his hair, his clothes, the inside of his nose. He started sleeping in the tiny office behind the bays, door locked, shotgun on his lap, dreams flickering with twisting roads and engines screaming in the dark. Headlights sweeping past as something massive moved just outside the circle of light. Then, one night, maybe 2 weeks in, he heard something new. A voice. Travis, it whispered from the far bay, soft and wet, like someone gurgling through oil. He froze, shotgun halfway to his shoulder, breath caught in his throat. Travis, help us, fix us. The keys rattled on the counter behind him, one set sliding off and clinking onto the stained concrete floor. Fix us. He didn't sleep at all after that. The nights bled together. The radio always crackling with static no matter the station, the lights buzzing and sputtering overhead, the smell of burned rubber and old blood thickening until it made him gag. Sometimes he saw shapes moving between the cars, long, thin limbs reaching under chassis, fingers smearing fresh grease in loops across the floor. He thought about quitting, about leaving town altogether, but when he stood at the bay door, the night beyond looked wrong. Too black, the shadows between the distant street lamps deeper than they should have been, pulsing faintly as though breathing. He felt something watching him out there, something that would follow if he tried to run, so he stayed. He started fixing the phantom cars, though he never saw them arrive. He'd turn around, and there they were. Old Fords, Chevys, rust bucket sedans that looked like they'd been dredged out of a swamp. Paint bubbled and peeling, windows black as coal. He changed the oil, replaced cracked belts, tightened loose parts with hands that shook so bad he sometimes gouged himself on the fan blades. He never saw who drove them in. He never saw them leave. But every morning they were gone, and the keys were gone too, though the counter was always streaked with grease and patterns he couldn't read. The voices grew bolder. They whispered to him from the back room, from under the cars, from the walls themselves. Sometimes they sounded like old customers he barely remembered, men and women long dead or gone, calling his name in the same flat, tired drawl they'd used when they dropped off their beaters years ago. Travis, almost done, almost ready. One night he woke up slumped in the office chair, shotgun still across his lap, to find the bay lights blazing and every lift full, cars jammed in so tight he couldn't see the walls. Engines idled softly, the air pulsing with heat, headlights flickering on and off like blinking eyes. The grease streaks covered everything now, thick and black, dripping from the ceiling, running in trails down the glass of the bay doors. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't move, heavy as lead. The voices rose all around him, whispering and laughing, the words slurring into each other, merging into one voice deep and hollow as a cave. Ready now, take us out, take us back. He tried to scream, but the air was gone from his lungs, the room spinning around him as the engines roared louder, high and shrill, until they became a single shriek of metal grinding on metal, the lights strobing so fast they left trails of ghostly afterimages in the dark. And then he saw them. Shapes in the driver's seats. Pale faces with empty black sockets for eyes, mouths stretched wide and gaping, hands gripping wheels slick with blood and something darker. They were looking at him, every one of them, and he knew in his gut they'd been waiting for him to finish the job, waiting for him to send them back out into the world where they could hunt again, where they could feed, "Take us back," they whispered in unison, their mouths opening wider and wider, the sound swelling until it drowned out the roar of the engines, until it became the only thing he could hear. He tried to run, but the grease on the floor sucked at his boots, pulling him down, thick and black and cold as grave dirt. He fell, the shotgun clattering away, his arms sinking into the sludge, the voices pounding in his skull until he thought it would crack. "Take us back, take us back." Then the world went black. They found the shop empty in the morning, the lifts lowered, the bays clear, no sign of Travis anywhere. The keys were gone, the counter clean as though it had been wiped down with bleach, though the faint outline of greasy handprints still shimmered in the right light, clawed and long-fingered. No one has seen Travis since, though sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls down the empty streets of Abilene, folks say they hear engines roaring in the dark, tires screeching just beyond the edge of the porch light. And if you listen close, they say you can hear a man's voice, ragged and hoarse, calling out from the middle of the roar, begging someone, anyone, to stop the cars before they come for you next. It was near the end of July when the nights in McAllen got so hot they felt like they weighed on your chest, pressing your lungs flat, but the ice cream truck still had to run. Miguel had driven that battered white truck for 5 summers, the jingle of "Turkey in the Straw," echoing down quiet streets until the little ones came running barefoot to fill paper cones with rainbow sprinkles. He knew every back road, every alley that led past the brimming fields of sugarcane, every street lamp that flickered on just past 11. Normally, by midnight, the truck sat locked up behind the garage, drowsy as a cat in the darkness. But that summer, the orders kept coming. It started with the first call. A phone number flashed on the handheld scanner at 11:47 p.m., a string of digits without a name. Miguel pressed the button and heard children laughing, soft, giddy, like marbles rolling over glass. They asked for vanilla soft serve with strawberry swirls, just like they always did. But when he rolled the truck up to 9th and Main, the streets were empty, paint peeling on the curbs, the concrete so hot it steamed under his wheels. No one came running. No small faces pressed to the windows. Only the echo of his engine in the sleeping town. He shrugged it off, turned around and went home. But the next night the call came again, the number the same, the laughter more insistent, as if a dozen small voices were crowding the speaker at once. He answered beside the flickering porch light of the garage. "Ice cream," they whispered, "come out." Miguel told himself someone was playing a prank, that maybe some kids with too much free time and too many phones were messing with him. But when he checked the call log, there were no outgoing calls, only the one incoming number that never changed. On the third night, he stayed in the truck until 1 o'clock, windows down, engine idling. He imagined a child's face peering in, a sticky hand pressing on the glass, an upturned smile. Instead, there was only the still black of the alley, the wet smell of rotting fruit behind Mrs. Ramirez's house, the distant hiss of irrigation sprinklers. He felt something brush the side mirror, flimsy and cold, like a wet cloth, and his heart slammed so hard against his ribs he thought it might break through. He turned the key off, and the laughter stopped. But when he reached the garage, the scanner lit up again. One more call waiting, time-stamped at 1:03 a.m. He looked at the number, the same, and heard the faintest giggle cutting through the night like a blade. He dropped the phone and ran inside. Over the next week, the calls grew more detailed. Neapolitan, they'd say. Rainbow popsicle. Double scoop, chocolate chip cookie dough. Miguel found himself restocking the truck's freezer at 2 in the morning, fists shaking as he measured powdered mix, scooped cones, sprinkled toppings. He'd peer into the rearview mirror, expecting to see the reflection of some small figure sitting in the back, but there was only empty seats, the glass frosting over with condensation. Then he started finding them. Footprints pressed into the melting ice on the sidewalk, little bare soles that trailed away into the shadows. He'd step out to check and find puddles of pink slush, melting too quickly in the southern humidity. A single child's shoe half buried in the mush. No footprints leading toward them, no marks heading out, just the solitary shoe, open and soft, as if someone had vanished mid-step. He told his sister, Anna, about it over the phone one afternoon. She laughed at first, told him he was working too hard, that maybe he needed a vacation. But when she visited that weekend and walked behind the truck, she found the melted footprints and the pink slick on the edge of the crumbling curb. Her eyes went wide, and she refused to go back inside the garage alone. Still, the next night, the phone rang. "Please," the voices said in unison, were so hot. Then the patter of little feet, the scrape of metal cups, the soft sob of a child crying. Miguel felt sick. He tried blocking the number, changing SIM cards, even leaving the phone off. But every night at the same time, the scanner lit up again, and he heard the voices. On the 10th night, he drove the truck out of town, following hidden lanes past the old citrus groves, chasing the static in the night. The voices told him to turn left at the broken oak, to stop by the dried creek bed, to come inside the abandoned schoolhouse where the windows were boarded up. His hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles bled, but he followed them because he couldn't bear the sound, the laughter, the pleading. When he pulled up to the schoolhouse, the door sagged on its hinges, the bleached boards curling away from the frame like rotten teeth. He shut off the engine, but the cooler lights inside the truck remained on, bathing the playground in a ghostly glow. He heard the voices now, all around him, echoing off the cinder block walls. "Scoops for sale! Scoops for sale! Children only! Children only!" He fumbled for his flashlight and stepped out onto the cracked asphalt, each footstep echoing in the still air. The laughter followed him, tight and manic, and he felt breath on the back of his neck. He spun, beam sweeping through darkness, catching nothing but the gnawed remains of a chain-link fence. He went inside. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and old glue, memories of crayon stains and chalk dust. In the center of the hallway, arranged in a neat circle, were small metal stools. Bright colors faded to rust, surrounding footprints in the dust, tiny circles pressed into the floor like someone had stamped them with a cookie cutter. The voices whispered around him, "Come play, come play," and he felt his legs give out. He dropped to his knees, hands over his ears, but the sound burrowed into his skull. Then he saw her, or it, a little girl, maybe 5, hair matted and dark, eyes empty hollows that reflected the beam of his flashlight. She stood in the doorway at the far end of the hallway, holding an ice cream cone that dripped onto the floor in puddles of pink and white. She didn't speak. She only tilted her head, lips parting in a smile that was too wide, too still. Miguel tried to back away, tried to scream, but no sound came. The hallway around him seemed to stretch, the circle of stools and footprints growing larger until it swallowed the exits, the windows, the glow of the moon beyond the broken boards. The girl stepped forward. Then another child appeared behind her, and another. Faces he recognized from old obituaries in the newspaper. Children who'd vanished over the years, lost at fairs, drowned in irrigation canals, gone without a trace in that same summer heat. They surrounded him, their voices a ragged swirl. "Thank you for coming. We missed you. We're so cold." The floor beneath him felt slick. He looked down and saw a puddle of melted ice cream, blackening in the dust, swirling like oil. The footprints pressed around him closed in, inching toward his knees, then his thighs, as if the ground itself was crawling with little feet. He crawled for the door, but the studs shifted, the boards whined, and the hole he ducked through closed behind him with a crack that jolted his spine. He tumbled into the night, phone clattering from his pocket, the schoolhouse door slamming shut. He ran without looking back, through groves of dead citrus trees, across dry fields that cracked underfoot, until the jingle of turkey in the straw drifted back to him, faint and sweet. He stepped into the street and saw the ice cream truck parked under a street lamp, lights glowing, engine idling. The door stood open. He reached the steps and looked inside. The freezer bins were filled with melting cones and half-eaten popsicles, colors bleeding into each other in rivers of pink and green. And on the counter the phone lay open, screen lit, the incoming call flashing. "Please." He climbed in. The door shut behind him with a soft click. He heard laughter all around, closer now, as if small bodies were pressing against the windows, begging him to start the engine again. He felt something brush his arm, cold and small, then a giggle in his ear. "Your turn, mister. We're so hungry." He didn't need to turn the key. The engine roared to life on its own, the jingle beginning low and warped, like children's teeth clattering in the dark. And as the truck rolled forward into the empty street, Miguel knew it would never stop, would never let him out again, that the laughter trailing behind would be all he ever heard for the rest of his nights in McAllen. It began on a muggy September evening when the humidity rolled off the Gulf like a living thing, clinging to the docks of Victoria and settling into the bones of the old cotton warehouses. Javier had taken the night watchman job because it was quiet, simple. Stroll the perimeter every hour, flip the floodlights on for 10 minutes so the security cameras could do their rounds, then back to the office, fill out the log, sip lukewarm coffee until the next check. He'd been doing it for weeks, and nothing ever happened. Until the night he saw the first face. He was halfway through his third lap when the lights dipped, swinging in wide arcs across the cracked asphalt yard. Wet air flickered with insects, and somewhere in the dark, a steel door clanged shut. Javier looked up at the nearest floodlight as it swung toward him and caught something pressed against the thick plate glass of the guardhouse. The shape of a face, white as bone, eyes too large, too round, staring back at him. He froze, flashlight trembling in his hand. The face didn't move, didn't blink, just stayed there, pressed flat against the window until the light swung away and it vanished, leaving only the reflection of Javier's own startled eyes. He flipped the light back on and crossed to the office in long, careful strides. Inside, the chairs were empty, the desk neat. He stared at the blank security monitors, imagining pale shapes lurking off-screen. When he logged it and lay down on the cot behind the desk, he told himself he was tired, that the late hours were playing tricks on his mind. But in the dark, he heard a soft whisper through the wall vents. "Javier, Javier." Very faint, like someone sucking in breath through a straw. He held his breath until it stopped. The next hour, he did his lap again. The yard lay silent under the buzzing lights. He counted out the 10 minutes, then clicked the lights off. As the cameras swung over the far corner where the shipping containers sat stacked 3 high, he saw another face. This one pressed to the glass of the loading bay door, mouth stretched wide in a grin that never reached the dark, hollow eyes. The light swept on before he could see it again, but he swore he heard soft, wet breathing on the other side of the door. He backed away, heart slamming, and shut the light off early. In the office, he sat with his back to the window, refusing to look at it. The monitors glowed quietly, showing empty dark squares. He sipped coffee that tasted like old shoe leather and tried to calm himself with thoughts of home. His wife's laughing face, the neighbor's dog barking at the moon, anything but the shapes in the yard. On the third night, he checked the cameras just before flipping the lights on. On one screen, he saw dozens of faces piled against the glass like hands pressing for air, eyes wide and shining, mouths moving as if chanting something he couldn't hear. He lunged for the floodlight switch, and when the yard erupted in white light, they were gone. The concrete lay bare, no wet footprints, no shadows. He shut the lights off and nearly vomited. By the fifth night, he was a wreck. Every hour he woke in a cold sweat, dread curling in his gut long before the lights clicked on. The air in the office felt thick, as if something was breathing right outside the door. Javier started leaving the radio on full volume and switched to stronger coffee, but neither helped. Then the whispers came. It began as a buzz in the speakers, like interference, static shaped into words. "Come out, come out." It spiraled through the tiny office, playing on every channel until Javier yanked the handset from its cradle, slammed it down. Silence. But the buzz continued in his skull, and he sank to the floor, pressing his palms against his ears. He didn't move for the rest of the night. When the dawn glimmered at the edge of the yard, he crawled outside, trembling, every shadow morphing into a face. He saw dark stains on the asphalt that looked like footprints, little puddles glinting too black to be oil. He called in sick the next night. He slept in his own bed again, but at 11:45, his phone rang with the guardhouse line. He rolled over and stared at the ceiling until it stopped. He imagined pale faces at the foot of his bed, heard the soft scrape of fingernails on wood. He turned on every light, but that only made the shadows deeper. By the seventh night, he knew the company would fire him if he quit. He couldn't explain a face pressed to the glass, couldn't say the cameras showed hundreds of bodies watching him, couldn't admit that voices whispered promises of secrets and power if he'd only come outside. So he went back. He arrived before his shift, shoulders hunched, eyes darting over every yard light and container corner. He carried a can of pepper spray and wore steel-toed boots, convinced he could ward it off. But he knew he was lying to himself. At 12:15, he raced his lap. The floodlights swung on. The first face appeared at the edge of the yard, greenish in the glare, skin hanging in folds, eyes dripping something dark. Next to it, another. 2 children, dead at the riverbank last spring, smiling sweetly through chipped teeth. Javier flicked the switch off and ran back inside, slamming the door. Locking every bolt, he radioed the office. No answer. He dialed the company office. No answer. The silence in the empty building felt close enough to touch. He fumbled for the flashlight, then remembered he left it in his car. He didn't dare go out there. So he waited. He sat in the dark, clutching his pepper spray can like a rosary, listening as the whispers began again. They told him he was special, that the lights belonged to him, that if he would step outside, they would show him wonders, would lift the heat off his skin, would make him the master of the yard. His stomach churned. He slid the can into his pocket and stood, as if some compulsion pushed him to the door. He reached for the handle, palm slick with sweat. A live feed blinked on the security monitor above him, the floodlights coming on. Faces pressed to the glass. So many faces, black-eyed and empty, pale lips moving. All the dead who worked here, dock hands crushed by crates, a caretaker struck by lightning, a kid run down on the highway just beyond the fence, lined up along the walkway, beckoning. Javier heard the door click behind him. He turned. Empty hallway, flickering bulbs. The whispering stopped, and everything was quiet but the hum of the monitors. He backed away, heart pounding, and stumbled over the cot. The door at the far end opened a crack. a ribbon of light slicing the darkness. He thought about running, but his legs wouldn't move. His breath froze in his chest as the glass walls of the guardhouse glowed bright and white. Something stepped inside. The monitor above him showed nothing. Faces moved past outside, glimpsed through the thick glass, fading in and out of the floodlit glare. A whisper in his ear, soft as velvet. "Welcome back." Javier screamed, but the sound was swallowed in the subterranean rumble of machinery, the drip of condensation on metal, the steady swing of the floodlights outside. And when he saw his own face pressed flat against the window, eyes wide and wet, mouth opening to speak, he knew he would never log another shift. He was part of the yard now, just another watcher in the glass, waiting to whisper promises through the floodlights to anyone foolish enough to come back. It started the Friday after Bastrop County's worst wildfire in memory, when the air still stung the back of your throat and the streets of Nacogdoches were dusted with gray ash that swirled like smoke in the streetlights. I was bartending at the Pines Lounge, the sort of place where the beer was cheap, the neon signs buzzed, and nobody asked too many questions. We stayed open until 4, closing time for the drunks and the night owls who stumbled in after the last bus had rumbled off into darkness. But that Friday, when the clock struck 3, the door creaked open again, and a man walked in who made the bar feel colder just by standing there. He lumbered to the stool at the far end, near the window that looked out onto the empty sidewalk, and his boots left little ash circles on the tile. He wore a coat so singed it looked like charred bark, and his hands, when he slid them onto the bar, were nothing but blackened flakes, as if he'd been dusted from the inside out. The smoke curled off him like live embers, but his eyes were the worst. Deep hollows, nothing but shadow where irises should be, silver gray like driftwood soaked in rain. I thought he'd ask for water or something mild. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, "Whiskey." Old Crow, neat. His voice rasped like a match struck on asphalt. I poured it, sliding the glass toward him. The amber liquid sloshed quietly, but he didn't lift it. He just stared at the flame of the overhead bulb, his face reflecting in the surface like a burned photo. After a long moment, he reached out and snapped his fingers above the glass. I had to jump, because the heat that flicked off his fingertips felt like the first wave of a furnace. Then his hand hovered over the whiskey, and the glass rattled on the wood as if some wind had caught it under the bar. I swallowed hard, wiped my forehead, told myself people were messing with me after too many shifts. He wasn't wearing a watch, but I checked the clock. 3:07 a.m. Ask 5 people in this town what happened at 3 a.m. on the day the fire jumped the creek, and each will give you a different story. Me, I never believed in all that until that night. He lifted the glass himself, though carefully, as if the weight was too much even for him. He took a swallow, and the bar lights dimmed a notch like he'd swallowed electricity as well as booze. I saw a flicker in the neon Budweiser sign, the red letters sputter. He set the glass down without a word, and the ash on his coat drifted to the floor, tiny black motes dancing in the beam of the overhead lamp. I reached for the glass to wipe my fingerprints, but as my fingers hovered just above it, the whiskey sloshed on its own, lapping the rim as if the drinker in ashes was still pulling at it. I decided to speak then, voice cracking. "You want another?" He turned to me slowly. His jaw was blackened bone, but the flesh on the side of his face looked strangely soft, like leather left too long in the sun. He said, "Do you have any more bottles from before the fire?" His words dangled in the smoke-thick air. I pointed to the dusty shelf behind me, where the older bottles sat gathering cobwebs. bourbons and ryes that cost more than half a week's rent. He shook his head. "Nothing that new," he said, "before the fire." His eyes flicked to the bottles like a man searching for ghosts. Then he said, "That's the one." He tapped my hand against a dusty bottle of Pop-Off, one with the label etched and curling at the edges. I pulled it down, and the dust that rose off it stung my lungs. He didn't take his eyes off me. When I poured it, I noticed the liquid was darker than usual, thicker, almost black in the shadows. He raised the glass to his lips, and in the yellow bar light I saw a spark behind his hollow eyes, a memory of flame, maybe, or the echo of a scream. The moment he drank it, the room shuddered. The jukebox in the corner skipped, then blared a country tune at full blast, static bleeding through the melody. I stumbled back, and the man in ashes reached out to steady me. His hand felt cold, all scale and ash, but the touch made me dizzy. The bar spun in circles. Papers on the counter fluttered like bird wings. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, the man was gone. The glass sat on the bar, still half full of black whiskey, the dust settling around it in neat, whispered patterns. The jukebox clicked off, and the neon signs hummed back up to normal. My hair stood on end. My heart was hammering so loud I thought it might show up on the TV in the corner as a blip on the waveform. I tried to shrug it off, tell myself I blacked out, that it was a dream, that too much coffee and not enough air conditioning will do things to you. But the next morning, I found footprints in ash around the stool, a perfect crescent, as if someone had pulled up a chair, lingered there, then stood and walked away, leaving the prints carved into the dust. And on the counter, scrawled in that same powder, were words, 3 a.m. Friday. My hand trembled as I traced the letters. Someone, or something, wanted me to know exactly when to remember. I kept closing early after that, but every Friday, like clockwork, the door would open at 3 a.m. sharp. Even if I tried to sleep, my phone would buzz with a text that said nothing but a timestamp. 3 a.m. I'd stumble up, bleary-eyed, and the Pines Lounge would feel different. Colder, smaller, hollow. The whiskey sat waiting, dark and oily on the bar, and the ash gathered in small pyramids beneath the stool. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. But then, just as the clock clicked past the hour, I heard it. The scrape of boots on concrete outside, the soft hiss of the door closing behind him, the whisper of a coat brushing the air. He'd appear in the same spot, shoulders hunched, face half melted into a mask of soot and bone. He never spoke a word I could understand anymore, only made a slow, reverent gesture to the bottle, and I poured. Every sip he took dimmed the lights a little more, turned the neon signs a deeper shade of red, erased whatever warmth lingered in the room. The jukebox skipped on its own now, launching into songs that pulsed with distortion, peeling the paint off the walls in time with his trembling breath. I found myself serving him old brands I didn't even keep. Bottles marked 1983 and earlier, labels long since faded to dust. I'd hunt through the storeroom, my hands shaking, and there they were, pristine, full, waiting for me to rescue them. And every time I opened a bottle, the hinges creaked like bones breaking. The draft around me turned wet, smelled of smoldering wood. The patrons stopped coming when they saw me stumble through the door at dawn, eyes sunk and hollow. They whispered about burnout, about the way the sign flickered at night as if someone was messing with the wiring. A few brave souls stuck around to ask what was wrong, but I could only shake my head. I was already halfway down the bar, pouring Popov and Petrovsky's Black Label without even looking. He'd be there in the reflection of the mirror behind the shelves, standing in his stool, waiting. By the third Friday, I understood. They weren't customers. They were something older. Men and women who died in that fire, charred beyond recognition, trying to salvage the moment they'd known human warmth. Each sip they took through the ash in their lungs tasted of smoky memories. Christmas mornings spent with families, first kisses under a porch light, the snap of spring rain on a tin roof. But the memories were dying every time. The whiskey stripped them away, purified them in flame and ruin until all that was left was black soot and bone. And each week their faces got sharper, the edges of their hollows carved in finer detail, until I could pick out the shape of their jaws, the hint of a widow's smile, the glint where tears had burned tracks through ash. I tried closing the bar on that third Friday night, but the moment my hand touched the lock, the window rattled, and a voice like wind through dead wood whispered, "Serve us one more." I backed away, heart hammering. But before I could decide to run, the door swung open by itself. He walked in through the silence that followed, boots crunching ash on the threshold. I found myself reaching for a glass, pouring whiskey until the bottle ran dry, then moving to the next. The jukebox fell silent, waiting for him to leave, and the needles of the neon signs pulsed like night watch lamps. When I finally set the last empty bottle down, I knew I'd sealed it. The bar went completely dark for a heartbeat. Then the overhead bulbs snapped back on, buzzing as if nothing had happened. He was gone. The stools were empty, but for the one at the end, scarred and blackened, like he'd sat there forever. The ash drifted to the floor in lazy spirals, settling at my feet in the shape of a question mark. I didn't serve the place again. I quit the next morning, left the keys on the counter and drove out of Nacogdoches with the morning sun cutting through my windshield like a blade. But every Friday at 3 a.m., my phone still lights up with a timestamp, and I feel that same cold in my chest, that same scratch of ash in my throat. I hear the rasp of a voice echoing through my dreams, whispering, "One more drink." And I know that somewhere in the dark, in some burned-out corner of Texas night, there's a bar waiting for me to open, a stool waiting for a man in ashes, and a glass waiting to be poured. I don't go back. I can't. But the clock keeps ticking, and the ashes never settle. It began just before the rooster's first crow, when the sky over Denton was still ink dark and the neon sign outside the 24-hour diner flickered like a dying eye. I'd worked the graveyard shift for nearly 2 years, flipping hash browns and tending the coffee urn while the rest of the world slept. Most nights were quiet, just me, the hiss of the fryer, and the clink of dishes in the sink. But one morning, the order came through the little speaker above the grill. Short stack, extra syrup. No number, no table. I glanced at the time, 4:37 a.m. before dawn. I shrugged and made the pancakes. 3 golden circles stacked high, draped in sticky amber syrup that pooled on the plate like a poisoned puddle. I slid it to the counter and waited. At 4:42, the bell above the door tinkled soft as a child's laugh, and I looked up. There was nobody there. The booths were empty, the stools lined up like soldiers against the chrome edge of the counter. But when I turned back to the plates, I saw it. A body, or what passed for one, slumped forward on the stool nearest the window. The vinyl cracked as I pulled out the stool to get a better look, and the thing lifted its head with a slow, creaking motion, as though a rusty hinge had been undone. Its face was pale and stretched taut over cheekbones too sharp, the skin sloughed away in places to reveal raw muscle and white teeth. There were no eyes, only empty sockets that glowed faintly in the flickering fluorescent light. Its lips peeled back in a grin, and I saw the smear of syrup on its chin, runnels of red that looked at first like jam but were darker, stickier. I'd have run if my legs had listened. Instead, I moved as if in a dream, standing at the grill with the spatula still in my hand, heart hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to call out, to ask what it wanted, but my voice snagged in my throat. The corpse raised a bony hand, knuckles splintered, reaching toward the pancakes. The syrup on its fingers glistened as though catching its last breath of light. I watched, frozen, as it drew the plate closer and took a bite, the pancakes folding under its jaw with a wet, horrible slurp. I snapped out of it then, grabbed a rag and tried to wipe the blood syrup off the counter, but my movements felt slow, weighed. When I looked up, the eyeless thing was gone, vanished into the dining room as though it had never been. Only the stool remained, vinyl torn and stained, and the plate smeared with what looked like coppery congealment. I swept it into the sink and told myself it had to be a hallucination, a trick of fatigue, of staring too long at the fryer light. But that morning, when I clocked out at 7, I found ridges of syrup on the sidewalk outside, the same amber glint in the pale twilight. I almost scraped them away, but something held me back. That afternoon I tried to nap at home, but sleep slipped away as though stolen. In my half-waking dreams I saw the corpse's hollow sockets and heard its voice, hoarse and gurgling, asking for more. When my alarm buzzed at midnight, I tossed off the covers and laced up my worn sneakers. I wasn't sure why I went back. Maybe I wanted to prove I wasn't crazy, but I found the diner just as I left it. Empty booths, a trash-strewn parking lot, and the plate of pancakes waiting at the counter, syrup glinting like wet oil. I slid onto the stool, hand trembling as I picked up a fork. The pancakes were still warm, and the syrup had pooled in deeper rivulets overnight, darker at the edges. I lifted a bite to my mouth and froze. The door opened behind me, slow as a tomb cracking. I didn't need to turn around. I knew it was there, the corpse sliding onto the stool next to me, smelling of burned sugar and decay. I dropped the fork and watched its gaunt profile in the stainless steel splash guard. It reached across and took the fork, plunging its hand through the pancakes and lifting a forkful to its mouth without breaking eye contact with me, though eyes weren't there to see. I swear I saw movement in those sockets, a shifting of shadows that felt like intelligence. It spoke then, its voice a rasp that echoed in the hood vent above the grill. More. I shook my head, tried to back away, but the stool caught on a chair leg and I twisted, knocking over a mug of coffee that steamed onto the linoleum floor. The creature reached out and touched the spill, the liquid smoking where its fingers passed, the droplets sizzling like hot coals. I stumbled off the stool, grabbed the spatula, anything to defend myself, but the thing just stood, wobbly on its spindly legs, syrup dripping from its mouth. I found the grill brush and waved it, but when I drew a breath to scream, a fresh order came through the speaker. Short stack, extra syrup. That silent speaker felt like it was mocking me. I ran to the kitchen phone, dialed for the manager, but there was no dial tone, only the echo of pancake batter dripping into the bowl. I turned back and saw the corpse was gone again. The lantern-red glow of the neon sign outside blinked through the windows, but inside the diner was dark. I groped for the light switch, and the bulbs hummed on, casting the booth shadows into sharp relief. The pancakes were gone, the plate gleaming empty on the counter. I wiped my forehead, hands shaking so badly I nearly knocked the sugar dispenser onto the floor. I closed early that night, locked the door, and didn't leave the office until sunrise. But every morning at dawn, like clockwork, the bell would jingle once, softly, and I'd find a short stack waiting on the counter. Syrup pooled so thick it left dark rings on the formica. no footprints, no note, just the plate. I tried leaving the plate out on the sidewalk, but by the time I arrived at work, it would be back on the counter, the syrup darker, flecked with rust-colored specks. I tried splattering bleach across the countertop, scrubbing until my knuckles bled, but the syrup resisted, gliding in congealed strips that spelled no words but felt like threats. Soon, the other cook caught wind of it. He asked why I was quitting night shift. I lied, said I had a new day job, something better. He nodded and punched in for me. I left the diner for good at dawn, leaving the keys on the counter. But even now, late at night, I catch myself waking in a cold sweat, hearing the creak of a stool sliding across the floor, the hiss of the grill igniting, the low rasp of a voice begging, "Short stack, extra syrup." And I know that somewhere in Denton, before the sun rises, a pale thing still waits at the counter, mouth dripping with blood and sugar, ready to be served again. It will never leave, and neither will I. It was the first week of November when the fog rolled in off Lake Texoma like a living thing, clinging to the concrete pillars of the rest area on I-35 and settling into every crack in the asphalt. I'd taken the overnight attendant job because it paid more than any fast food shift and nobody ever bothered you out here. Just the hum of the highway lights and the distant roar of 18-wheelers throttling down the ramp. I liked having the place to myself. The way the mist curled around the picnic tables and the vending machines gave off a soft neon hiss that cut through the quiet. The first night I heard it, I was cleaning the glass on the coffee machine, wiping away dust and an old smudge of syrup when the booth phone buzzed. Nobody ever called. I lifted the receiver and heard a woman's voice, breathless and far away. 2 coffees black. Exact change, then the click of coins dropping. I blinked at the empty lot. No headlights, no footsteps on the pad outside the door. I dropped the phone, and the line went dead. The next night, at 2:03 a.m., the pay station beeped. The card reader never beeped late at night. I walked out to the toll lanes and found 2 tickets fluttering on the windshield of an idle SUV, license plate washed clean by the mist. The tickets showed a date 20 years old, fare unpaid. I walked the lot end to end. No vehicle but my patrol truck. No footprints in the gravel. Only fog pooling under the high-beam halos. I tucked the tickets inside my coat and walked back to the booth, heart pounding. By the end of the week, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every hour I stepped outside to reset the lights on the concrete pylons, swinging the lever to bathe the lanes in harsh white glare so the cameras could scan for toll jumpers. One night, as the light swept across the back of the lot, I saw a figure standing near the guardrail, tall, straight-backed, face turned away. I flipped the light off, spun around, and when the beam came back on, the shape was gone, swallowed by the fog. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination or fatigue. I drank extra coffee, pounded energy bars, but the calls kept coming. The woman's voice returned over the phone. Sometimes a man's voice, gravelly and slow, always placing an order for coffee or bottles of water from the machine or handing me old toll tickets. Always exact change, always the day's date stamped 2 decades ago or more. Every time I slipped the tickets into the shredder, the slot jammed, spitting them back at me through the slit in the feed tray, curling like torn skin. Then came the footsteps. Soft at first, like someone tapping on the metal doorframe. Then closer, pacing just beyond the booth window, breath fogging the glass. The first time I looked up, I caught a pair of eyes staring at me through the mist. Empty sockets that glowed faint blue under the interstate lights. I stumbled back, dropping the ticket I'd been holding. It fluttered back down, landing face up. the name of a man who died in a wreck on that very off-ramp 24 years ago to the day. I didn't sleep that week. I stayed inside the booth, rigid as a statue, staring at the door. My radio crackled with static even though I never turned it on. The vending machine lights flickered, spilling half their glow into the black. At precisely 3:17 a.m. on Thursday, the telephone rang again. I answered on the third ring and heard a child's laugh, soft and urgent. "Fill them up." Then dozens of tiny footsteps scuttled away down the gravel, faint as whispering wind. I turned on the exterior camera monitors. Each screen showed empty lanes, each lane a mirror of the next. Then one screen snapped to an infrared view, and there was a row of pale forms standing at the edge of the fog, bodies drooping, clothes stained with mud and old rain. Their heads bobbed in unison as though they were swaying. I reached for the floodlight switch, but my fingers froze above it. They didn't move. That night, just before dawn, I heard a tap on the window. I cursed and stumbled forward, expecting some prankster, but there was nothing but the thick gray hush. I wiped at the glass with my sleeve, and a smudge of coal-black ash smeared where a handprint should be. I licked my thumb and touched the streak. It tasted bitter, like burnt rubber. I nearly vomited on the tile floor. At 4:59 a.m. on Friday, the pay station spat out another ticket, and this one bore the name of the first girl who vanished from that rest area in 1998. 11 years old, never found. The ticket's edges were singed, curling toward the center like a dying flower. My hands shook so bad I dropped it, and it slid across the desk toward the booth phone. It stopped at the receiver, and the phone began to ring on its own. I stared at the blinking red light, heart pounding in my throat, and then everything went silent. Only the steady drip of condensation from the roof seams and the faint hum of the interstate. I picked up the ticket and read the inked words, "Thank you for waiting. Remember us forever." Beneath, a timestamp, 5 a.m. Then the lights in the booth flickered, the vending machine buzzed to life, and the tickets vanished, leaving only that acrid taste in the air. I walked home with the sunrise burning the fog away. I handed in my keys, throat tight, and told the supervisor I was ill. He pressed me for details, but I just shook my head. "Nothing you want to know," I said. He didn't press further. After all, it was just another anti-textbook resignation. Now, every night at 3 a.m., I wake to my phone buzzing with a single notification. An image file. When I check it, I see a ghostly frame captured from the rest area camera. The empty toll lanes, bright under the lights, and in the distance, just at the edge of the mist, a row of pale figures staring back at the lens. Behind them, the highway stretches north toward Dallas. Traffic a blur of taillights. The timestamp reads 3 a.m., and I know they're still there, waiting for someone to open the booth door, waiting for someone to take their exact change, waiting for someone to remember them at last. And I know that one day I might answer that call again, because the fog never truly lifts, and the dead always come back for what they're owed.